So I've been working on this Series 2 330, and one of the projects that the customer wanted me to try to find was a new center console. So one of the problems that I have was that this was the console that was in the car. It is kind of like a mishmash of old parts and new parts. And what you can see is you could see the centerpiece, or this center console piece is original, because I could tell from the fiberglass and the way the shape of it is. But what previous owner had done, or shop had added this whole extra piece back here, put an armrest in, put a radio panel here that bolted and unbolted, and then bolts in the back here. It was all upholstered. You know, it was actually a pretty comfortable armrest and center console, but it wasn't original, because this is what the original one looked like. The original one is a little bit smaller, doesn't have the shoulder rest, and you know, you can see the same thing. It's got the little vents in the back and this little fiberglass thing, but when you look underneath, this is one piece. So the center console, or the radio and all that other stuff, fits there. Places for the window switches, ashtray, and this little pocket here, lighter setup. So what the owner wanted me to do was, he said, "Hey, listen, let's find another one. Let's find one that we can do and replace this one that just isn't correct. Return the car to original." So I've been on the lookout, basically all over the place. Asked all my contacts, you know, guys who have spare parts, and just asked them to take a look to see if they could find, you know, a console like this. For a Series 2 330, Ferrari 330, there's a couple variations, or two variations, one with air conditioning and one without air conditioning. And but generally the shape is the same. And you know, it's when you start chasing these parts, you start learning a lot about the little details that are different. The non-air conditioning cars don't have these vents on the side. There's a little scallop in the piece, slightly different. But again, not a deal killer. But it just didn't exist. I couldn't find it. I called around. I asked, you know, 4 or 5 places in the States. I had people looking all over the place. I put it out on my website. Say, hey, listen, if you know of one, let me know. One of them did turn up in Europe, but the cost was just crazy. I mean, you know, you realize that anything that you buy is going to be out of another car. It's also going to be in probably as bad shape as this one is, as far as the leather. It would have to be reupholstered and sometimes repaired. But I was willing to do it because when you look at the details of creating this piece, you know, it's worth paying a certain amount of money. I mean, there's certainly thousands, but this one was like several $1,000s. And I said to my customer, so that's excessive. I mean, somebody who has a used piece like this sits there and just pulls a number out of his head and says, hey, listen, I want $8,000 for it, or $7,000, or $5,000. And it's just like, wait a minute, where do you get that number? Because how often does it happen that you need one of these things? I've probably this is probably the second center console that I've had to do in 15, 20 years of doing this stuff. So it's not like every day that someone is either missing a center console, or needs one, or broke theirs so badly that it's not repairable. Because when you look at it, it's just fiberglass. So like if it cracked or broke, all this stuff can be fixed. You know, it can be remanufactured. In fact, you can see here, like there's a crack, you know, here in this original one, but that's not a big deal. It's not going to show up when you pull this out. Somebody probably put something heavy in here and cracked it, but it's not irreparably damaged. But to buy one that's used and to pay that kind of money got to the point where it's just like, I don't know what we should do. I mean, he wants it. I don't blame him for wanting to return it to original. These cars are only getting rarer, and they're probably worth more as they get older, and it's good to replace them because, you know, as much trouble as I'm having trying to find a center console right now, it's only going to get harder. So the next decision was what choice do we have? So one of the things I do know that we have as an option is we could take this and this one. Since I have this one from one of my customers, it eventually is going to get reupholstered. We could use this as a template and make another one, copy it. It's kind of complex, and then it's not that complex. I mean, it's a couple pieces. I looked at it closely. It's basically 3 pieces, and it's got these side rails. It's got the center section here, and then this U-shaped piece here. So it's 3 pieces, and it's basically fiberglass. You'd have to make a mold, and then you lay just as they did here. You just lay the fiberglass over it. And you can create a piece. There's a little reinforcement place in here, probably for a cigarette lighter. But in fact, it's funny when you look at the place where they put this reinforcement plate. It's actually not even lined up where the cigarette lighter or the ashtray actually is. It's a little bit further forward. But anyway, so that was one option. It takes time. It wouldn't be cheap. I mean, not that cheap or free. It's just time. It's just time and material. Somebody to make a mold, 3 molds, copy it, lay the fiberglass, make a copy. That's one process of which we could do. Another idea is to use 3D printing. I spoke to a friend of mine, Stephen Dibden, who has a 3D printing company. And he and I have done some projects before, and we've scanned smaller items and made them. And I kind of talked to him. I says, maybe this is a project that would be worth getting into, because we could scan it and make this thing and print it, 3D print it, and then upholster the actual 3D printed product, as opposed to, it's almost like skipping a step. We could strip this, scan it, print it, and then upholster right onto it, as opposed to another process of which he's been doing for smaller items is to scan it, print the mold section of this. In other words, you can scan this piece and then create the negative side of this, and then lay fiberglass into it and make a fiberglass mold. That's one possibility, and I know people have been doing that, using 3D printing in another process as opposed to just printing it. But he also thinks that the particular, if you choose the right material to print with, it's sturdy enough to create an actual piece that looks just like this in plastic that is printed, and then we just go ahead and take it to the upholsterer, and he will just upholster it as if he was upholstering the fiberglass. So that's the plan. So what we're going to do is we're going to try this. We're gonna try this as a process, simply because it's exploring new ways to do stuff. People talk about 3D printing, how great it is and all this other stuff, but it's a lot of people have this misconception that it's just it's like scanning a document. Scan a document and then hit print, and it prints out a perfectly formed piece. It's not exactly like that. I mean, there are certain surfaces about 3D printing that still needs to be finished. You have to have a certain knowledge of 3D design and CAD CAM to modify. Like, for instance, you can see that this is pretty flexible, and the actual piece that this bolts to is different, and also it's a handmade car. So a lot of this stuff, you can print it and still have to modify it because it's not going to fit. Also, you can see that this section here is thicker than this section. So are these things are we going to make modifications in the actual file to allow for these thicker pieces and thinner pieces? Are we going to put this reinforcement? How are we going to make this reinforcement plate so that we could put it in here? Why was it here? Did they put that there because they had had a reason to put there because of the ashtray? If it was, I mean, it certainly reinforces, spreads out the load, but you could see they put an extra patch to lay that little steel plate in there. Are we going to do the same thing, or can we reinforce it just simply with 3D printing? So there's a lot of things that we need to discuss. It's probably going to cost us about half as much as the expensive one that we're talking about, but this is the process in which we're trying to figure out. It's certainly not inexpensive, but it's certainly less expensive than buying one that's available and have to do half the process anyway of stripping and reupholstering. We also don't know the risk that we take with buying a used one is it could be as damaged as anything else and still needs repairs. So this is the process. So I think the first thing I have to do is get this one stripped down to its component pieces, get the leather off today, and then we're going to go from there. I think I'm going to use a little bit of combination of heat and just pulling this off, and we'll go from there. So this is the start of a new project. Well, I got all the leather off of the console. If you look at the time lapse, it just took a little bit of time. Leather was pretty well stuck. After I got the little vents off and heated them up, the glue would kind of release, and you would be able to get the vents off. Then it was just a matter of trying to get everything just released and unstuck. The glue was pretty well, lasted pretty well over the years. It's funny, I sometimes wish we had glue this strong today. When you look at some of the new stuff that's out there, the glue seems to not stick as well as this old stuff. This stuff was pretty well stuck. A lot of times I see, new Ferraris with their dashes, and the leather on the dash just pulls right out and pulls off the windshield. Why is it that this leather doesn't do that? I don't know. It's just, I think it's the glue and the way that they're attached. This one, after 60 some odd years, 50, 60 years, it's still pretty stuck. So anyway, got 3 pieces apart, and this is it. This is the center console. What was interesting is, I put this little X piece here because there was a funny little screw or a patch or something. I'm not sure what it was, but I'm just putting it there just so that we have it in case we scan it. There's something that was screwed here. I'm not sure what that was, but it certainly, I haven't seen it on the cars. It's got 2 little screw holes. I'm not sure what they are, but who knows. Anyway, this piece will now get scanned, and we'll see what happens as far as getting it done. So it's 3 pieces, and this part where the radio fits in is a little thicker, so when it gets printed, we'll probably have to make it a little thicker than normal, and I think that's really just so that the radio has some kind of support to hold it up. This piece goes around this bottom panel. So what I'm going to do, this is from the car that we're making it for. So I'm going to use this and give it to be used for the scanning, so that they understand that the shape. This is the shape that it needs to be. When it's not in there, it kind of pretty flimsy. So I think that's going to be an important piece to include when we scan it, because that'll give it the actual shape that it needs to be, and then we'll make that. And then this piece goes into here and slides like that, and this all kind of ties together like that. This kind of goes forward a little bit more. It's kind of sloppy, but it'll all go together, and then that's what we'll do. We'll put this all together and get it scanned and see what the next step is. But the hope is that we'll get this made and printed We'll have to figure out, like, there's certain things that will have to be scanned and figured out whether or not it's doable, whether or not this is just a solid piece or if it's a hollow piece. I don't know. I'll let the guys who do this stuff figure it out. Another interesting thing, just as little side pieces to look at the construction, this is just a piece of fiberglass, and it was laid into a mold this way and then built up from here. That's why it's a little rougher on here. The funny thing is they put a little steel plate inside the fiberglass to reinforce this flat piece, but there's the 2 screws for the ashtray, and it didn't even come close to where they put the reinforcement plate. I'm sure the reinforcement plate works either way. I think what they did was they added it just because when you're in the console, that's probably a real easy place to crack, especially how thin this can be. So they put a plate in there to reinforce it. You can also see there's a little bit of a crack there from just the pressure. So it can be a little delicate. The other interesting thing is they added these patches in here, filler, because I think what happened was when they laid this in the mold and they popped it out, these little holes or bubbles were in the fiberglass, so then they just went back and filled them in with some kind of resin and filled it. So, you know, lots of signs of handmade pieces. This is definitely a handmade piece, and that's kind of what Ferrari is all about. So this is the next step. We're going to take this down to get it scanned and printed. So let's go to the next step. Stephen Dibden at Additive Restoration scanned the pieces that I gave him and created this digital file of the pieces, including clearances for leather and reinforcement bracing underneath that would eventually be printed in plastic. The console was a little large for Stephen's printer, so he sent it out to another vendor that had a larger 3D printer that could do it. But unfortunately, the first attempt didn't turn out right because the way it was oriented. So he had to change the way it was printed. But the second attempt was much better. Well, the center console is back. The original one is here, and it's got marks on it because it's all been scanned. And so I had Additive Restorations make this and print it. What took a while to do was to find a printer to do the size of this, because when you look at the size, you know, just a regular 3D printer would not have been able to do this. And in the process of finding a good printer, it took a while. What we learned, or what I also learned, was printing it is not so simple. I mean, there's a lot of steps that it's not so much, you know, 3D printing is one of these processes where people think you just scan it and then and you print it, and it's that simple, but a little bit more to it. I mean, there's clearances, there's places where you create these two pieces and the way they fit together, and how much room do we need when on this center console particularly, there's leather that goes on there. So there has to be clearance for all this as you put leather in here and on here. Then the other issues that you have, which is the way it's printed, because what we found was we had one printed already, and the printer that we sent it to, depending on the material that you use, can lay differently. So the surface finishes are different, because what happens is you can have these stripes, and this is how a printer it's printed. And if you print it this way, where it's layering it like this, what happens is the lines will end up differently. So one of the solutions is to print it in a different layer. So in other words, this was printed, I believe, on an angle like this and built up diagonally, so that way the printer lines would not affect the flat side of it. Because if you imagine, if you're looking at the cross section here and it's laid this way, these top lines would have these really bad printer lines going that way. Then you couldn't smooth it because the way it's drying and hardening, it would print differently. The other difference on printing, which is kind of cool, is that we created stiffening sides on all this, because we made this side a little bit more stiff, because if you take the original one here, the original one is thin, and you can see that it cracked already, because in the driver's position, this is right where the elbow goes, and put something heavy in there and it cracks. We were able to redesign this and add stiffening. You know, this area here is just kind of, I don't know what's, I think that's a little bit of printing issues that happen, but you know, again, it's on the back side of it, so not too concerned about it. But again, it has the way that it was printed. I mean, this is layered up. You know, if it was layered up in this angle, that's the way it was printed. It still required a little bit of filing and filling, just simply because it's never perfect. There's just a little bit of issues here and there, but I'm not too concerned about it, because this is going to get covered in leather. So we were able to do that. The next step for me is I have these cutouts that are going to be put in, where I'm going to put it in on this one. This is the printed version. So what I'm going to do today is cut these speaker holes and everything like that, and get this thing prepped, and then that way I could take it down to my upholsterer, and he can go ahead and start covering this in material. So that's the next step. It took a while, but we're happy to have it back, and moving on. Okay, the long-awaited center console is back from the upholsterer. So I'm going to do what most people are probably freaking out, is using a razor blade on one of these things, but I know the bottom of it, so I'm just going to cut this shrink wrap. I had it delivered from my upholsterer. He had wrapped it in leather, as per the customer. These center consoles originally were done in black vinyl, but my customer wanted to have it done in black leather. So we did it the way he wanted, and I think it looks pretty nice. Let's see if I can get this thing open without cutting the leather. Carefully just remove this plastic. I'm just about there on this console. What a journey. Unwrapped it and had to bring it back and get the shift boot installed, because it needed to be glued in. Ended up mounting the radio differently than what we had originally planned. It was going to put a speaker in here, but the clearance was so hard that we ended up going back to, you know, a single radio and speakers in the back. The process was challenging. I mean, I think that 3D printing, it's pretty cool that this is all 3D printed, but it doesn't fit like what you expect it to, because, for instance, these pieces still need to be trimmed, because even though it all fit in the computer, it was by the time you put it together, it still needed some hand fitting. But I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the car, and you'll be able to see this last bit. You know, all this had to be trimmed. Still had to trim this to get the all that stuff in. Had to do the wiring for the radio. It's you know, just a lot of little things just to get this right. But it's coming together. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the car. Finally got it to the point where it fits. Well, the console is finally done. I got the ashtray in. Found that one. The Series 2 330s get the large ashtray. Also found the cross flags and had to drill the hole and get that in there. So, you know, that took a little bit of precision, but we got that installed, and it's looking pretty good. You know, from no console at all to copying one to having it scanned and then 3D printed and then put in. I'm gonna leave the ashtray or the lighter open, because back in those days they had, instead of a 12-volt system, they had a cigarette lighter that you kind of stuck your cigarette in there and lit it. So that would have been correct, but these days you need a 12-volt receptacle to run, you know, charge your phone and all that stuff. And you know, if I can find something that's that's period, I'd put it in, but the owner can find that. It's standard 12-volt plug, but everything else is restored back to, you know, correctness, and it was a good project. So the car's cleaned and washed and ready to go home. So hopefully the owner will like what he sees. Thanks for watching.